Good morning. I'm Carla Blanton. I'm a Public Policy Chair for Commerce Lexington and own a public relations firm. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us today. We're excited to have Secretary of State Michael Adams and Fayette County Clerk Blevins with us today. This is kind of election 2.0. We had them with us during the primary, and we're very thankful that they kind of walked us through all the changes. We're just in such a new environment right now, and we've got some more tweaks for the general election, and so we're glad to have both of them back. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
We hope that this event will provide some clarity for everyone as they think about their strategy for going to the polls, whether it's in person, voting by mail. And so we're eager to hear the additional details. And we thank you again for taking your time. Secretary Adams, we'll start with you. If you could kind of walk through, and congratulations, by the way, on to both of you for having such a successful primary. I think it's rare that we have anything to be excited and brag about these days, just with all everything going on in 2020. But certainly, Kentucky served as a national model during the primary for how to do it safely and effectively. There are some changes coming up for the general election. So if you could kind of walk us through those changes, what those changes are, and kind of why there did need to be some changes going forward for November.
Sure. Thank you for this opportunity. I'll tell you, I am very reliant on groups like yours and opportunities like these to get information out to the voters. It's all good news, but it doesn't work if voters don't know what their options are and how convenient we've made it for them to go vote. So I'm very proud of the approach that the governor and I agreed on for the June primary. As you said, we were nationally recognized as a model for how to run an election in a pandemic. We had high turnout. We had no spike in COVID-19 cases, despite hundreds of thousands of Kentuckians voting in person. And we had no vote fraud. You can't ask for a more successful election than that. We've tried to maintain what worked so well in the primary, but we've also tried to change some things that we thought would not be replicable for November if carried to scale. So I think the best thing to do would be to walk through what's changed since June. Number one, absentee balloting is a good thing. It worked great. It will continue to work great, but we're not going to rely on it primarily for voting. We're going to try to rely more on in-person voting. We think that our load capacity for absentee ballots in the state is probably maybe 1 million tops, 800,000-ish to 1 million is about what we think our system can handle. States that rely heavily on absentee balloting or vote by mail, they take years and years to transition into that, different equipment, different training. They close down in-person voting for the most part and replace it. We're not able to do that under our laws, nor should we. So instead of having everyone being pushed to vote absentee ballot with no excuse, what we're doing this time is we're encouraging voters who are at risk, who deem themselves to be at risk due to their age, their health condition. And by the way, we don't second guess that. In my office or at the clerk level, that's the voter's decision. If you're not comfortable voting in person, by all means, please vote absentee. The same portal is there, govoteky.com. But we're not pushing everyone to vote that way. The release valve for our primary was absentee voting. The release valve for our election in November is in-person voting spaced out over 3 weeks. So we'll be much more reliant on in-person early voting this time than we were in the primary. So number one, we encourage you to vote absentee if you need to, but if you don't, then don't. Leave that for people who really need it. We've already opened the portal for that about 4 weeks ago, I believe. That runs until October 9th. So from now through the 9th of October, that's your time to go request your absentee ballot if that is how you intend to vote. We do encourage you to make a plan and follow your plan. Don't register for a ballot to vote absentee and then show up in person. It makes your life harder, our life harder, and other voters' lives harder. So make a plan. If you're going to vote absentee, go ahead and go to govoteky.com and request that ballot. Again, you can track that ballot the same way you did back in the primary. Total transparency for you, the voter. If you're not going to vote absentee, then starting October 13th, statewide, we're going to have 3 weeks of early voting. It's going to be all day on weekdays. We're also going to have Saturday hours in all 120 counties. The goal here is to make voting convenient, but also space out the crowds and ensure adequate social distancing. So to make that possible, we're pushing people to vote in person, but to do so early and not crowd election day if they can avoid that. And then finally, we still have a big challenge trying to get locations and poll workers for November. Fortunately, we've had more success for November than we had for June. We opened up a portal a couple of months ago. My office did at govoteky.com for people to register to volunteer to be poll workers. We found 4,000 volunteers that way of the 15,000 we would need for a regular election. That's a pretty good start. We worked out a promotional campaign with craft brewers around the state to promote this website on beer cans and labels. So we've had some success there. Even if we get every single poll worker volunteer we need, it doesn't solve all the problem. It's still a challenge to get the locations that have adequate parking, the ability to ensure social distancing and so forth. But here's some good news. I'm about to testify to the legislature in less than 90 minutes about the progress of this election. And I've already got 9 counties that have managed to fill every single precinct voting location and find a location, the same number they have in a traditional election, and have that many for November. That's great. We don't expect everyone to be able to do that. It's not realistic. But we are seeing a great deal of success in enhancing in-person voting opportunities on election day. I've approved, this time I get to approve the plans. I didn't in the primary. This time I get veto power. I've not had to use it yet, but I've had 48 county plans that I've reviewed and approved. Only one of those counties reduces all their locations to one place to vote on election day. That's Nicholas County, not too far from Lexington. And they normally have 2 locations to vote. They're going from 2 to 1. That's not unrealistic. But for the most part, our counties have been able to offer expansive early voting and expansive election day voting as well. So we've got a good story to tell. It's just a question of how much effort it takes to reach Kentuckians and let them know what their options are. But the important dates are October 5th at 4 p.m. is the deadline to register to vote. October 9th at 11:59 p.m. is the deadline to request your absentee ballot. And October 13th is when we start early voting in person.
Great, thank you so much. Clerk Blevins, if you could kind of go over maybe some of the changes that will be happening in Fayette County, kind of where you are, and then including things like will there be additional polling locations, and how are you doing in terms of poll workers? Maybe this is a pitch to fill some of those spots if you need them.
Well, let's start out with the good news then. We've already recruited all the poll workers we will need. We have sufficient numbers for both in-person voting, but also I've recruited a bunch of election workers to help with the processing of sending out ballots as well as bringing them back in and opening and counting them. So we have everyone we need. We're going to begin all of that pretty much right. Well, we're already shipping ballots today, but counting of ballots won't occur for a couple more weeks. So the challenge, Fayette's going to be slightly different than the rest of the state because we have a unique set of unlucky circumstances. The first one is that our arena and civic center is under construction and cannot be used. The second one is we are playing SEC football, which is good in some ways, but not so good for me because I can't use the stadium for early voting at least. Then lastly, our school system is still, in theory, could possibly go to in-person learning as of September the 28th at the next board meeting. So I don't know and can't know until then, which is too late in terms of planning for the election. So what I've done is cobbled together 6 locations around town that are exactly what the secretary described. They're ADA accessible, they have adequate parking, and we're gonna open them up on October the 13th and run all 6 of those locations throughout the duration of that time. One of them is downtown-ish. The other 5 are sprinkled around like a ring geographically, almost perfectly. So I feel like we've got good geographic coverage. Now, that's what makes us slightly different in Fayette County than the rest of the state. The rest of the state is trying to use the relief valve of in-person voting. But due to the limitations that we have in terms of locations, we're not going to be able to really handle a lot of people doing it that way. So I'm planning for right now a 30% of our turnout can go in person, or less than that percentage, I think we'll be okay. If we start going north of 30% of our turnout doing in person, I think it's going to overwhelm those 6 facilities. So we'll be pushing that message starting tomorrow. I'm sorry, I know everybody wants to know the locations. I can't tell you today, but tomorrow I will be able to start talking about it. In fact, the mayor and I have a press conference to reveal all of this at 1 o'clock tomorrow. In addition to those changes, we're also going to offer 6 ballot drop locations throughout the town, more or less at the same locations, not exactly, but same locations we're voting at. That way, folks that are uncomfortable with the post office can just drop their ballot off. Those will be hardened steel, really nice. They're built same kind that are used in Colorado and other places like that. 6 locations for the ballot drop boxes looks to be sufficient because similar sized cities, that's about what they do. So I think we're in pretty good shape. My only concern would be if we get a massive turnout in person, it might overwhelm those facilities.
So a quick question, this is almost as much personal as for everybody else. If you don't have a preference which way you vote and you want to be helpful to your staff, would it be better to vote absentee by mail or to early vote? Is there something that we can do to help you?
Yeah, vote by mail.
Okay.
That would be my strong preference for 2 reasons. Believe it or not, it's easier for us to handle because this time the state board and the secretary did us a favor. They actually made the decision a little bit sooner and gave us a broader planning window. But also they extended the time period earlier for when you can request your ballot and opened up more time for us to actually count the ballots. So because of all that, it's not going to be as hard this time than it was last time. Last time was a very compressed cycle. So yes, I would much prefer that folks vote by mail in Lexington.
We talked about this a little bit before everyone joined us, but there's been in the news that you have an employee who has the coronavirus, and we send our best wishes to her for speedy recovery. Can you tell people a little bit about how they will or won't be impacted, or what the situation will be there?
Well, it's going to be a royal pain for my office for the next couple of weeks, but from a voter's perspective, they won't notice any change whatsoever. In fact, we were able to stuff our first ballot packages late yesterday. They went out in the mail this morning. Today's a big push day. We're going to try to start eating up against the mountain of requests we already have. As of last Friday, for example, we had about 45,000 requests built up already. So once we start pushing this to the public, you're going to see that rise pretty rapidly. I'm planning for anywhere from 120 to 150,000 ballots to come in that way. It'll just depend on what people choose to do.
This question is for both of you, and we'll stick with Clerk Blevins to start out with. Can you provide, when do you anticipate that voters will know the election results? There's just been a lot of talk about, is it going to take weeks? How long is it going to take? And then how do you anticipate the changes impacting voter turnout?
Well, I think I'll answer the turnout question, then I'll defer to the secretary because I know he would probably like to talk about the results side of it. For turnout purposes, the largest we ever did in Fayette County was in 2008, was 72%. This time I'm planning for 85% turnout. Now I know that sounds ridiculous, but you have to plan for the worst case in terms of the number of votes, in terms of your planning for the election. What we will actually see, I believe, will be north of 72%. Anybody's guess how high, but there's no question there's a lot of interest in this particular election.
Thanks. Good segue to Secretary Adams.
Yeah, so I agree with Don. I think the turnout's going to be through the roof. I think it'll be historic. My rough projection at this point is 72% as a statewide average. It'll be higher, I think, than that in Fayette County. Fayette County historically has high turnout. Franklin County, Woodford County, that part of the state has high turnout. They did in the primary. I think they will in November too. I spoke with Jim Lurson, the Campbell County clerk. He's expecting 75% turnout. That's a big deal in Northern Kentucky. They actually have lower turnout there on average than the rest of the state. So it could be even higher than that. Obviously, you have to prepare for higher turnout than you actually expect in case your prediction is wrong. Then you can accommodate all those voters you weren't expecting. With regard to the results, one thing that we're doing differently this time is I'd say the biggest complaint I got in the primary was people wanted more places to go vote in person. The second complaint was we want to know who won the elections on election night. No state that's voted since the 1st of April in this pandemic has been able to produce election results on election night. New York voted the same day that we did. It took them 2 months to count their ballots. It took us just a week. But we're going to try to get as many votes counted as quickly as we possibly can. Part of what we're doing is we're, to a point that Don made earlier, we're massaging the calendar a little bit. We reached an agreement earlier than we did last time. We opened up the portal earlier than we did last time. We're also going to close it earlier than we did last time. And that helps us push that stage of the voting earlier, the absentee part of that process. That makes it easier on the clerks so they don't have to handle the processing of the absentee ballots out at the same time they're opening up in-person early voting. They're able to do one thing and then the other. But also hopefully means that we'll get the ballots returned back to us faster and we can go ahead and process them and report those. So on election night in the primary, we had about 25% of the vote counted. That basically represented all the in-person voting statewide. And then it took a week to count all the absentee ballots, run them through all the machines. This time, I think that on average, it'll be different urban counties. I think urban counties will be more reliant on absentee balloting than the rural counties. But as an average, I think that probably 60% of the vote, maybe even more, will be cast in person this year. So we'll have those votes all on election night. We just have to push a button, basically. We'll have those reported. We also think that we'll have a lot, maybe half, maybe more of the absentee votes processed and counted on election night as well. That could get us, we hope, to 75% or 80% of the vote counted on election night. That's not 100, that's 75 or 80, but that's still way ahead of the rest of the country. And it's enough for us to be able to project some outcomes and give some finality to the candidates and the voters.
That's going to be one of my questions. I know there was a little bit of a variation in terms of counties reporting partial results or waiting to report all of them. Will we, as votes are counted, will we be aware of those, or will there be a point in time in which the final results are given without much preliminary?
Well, results are never really final on election night. They're always unofficial for several days. The counties report to my office, and then they've got a few days to actually get us final totals, and then there's a recanvass usually and so forth. So we actually don't usually have final results election night. That will be true now, but we'll be at probably 80% reporting instead of 95% reporting. It's a bit of a shift, but we're giving the counties days to count these ballots. It takes time, especially because instead of having a deadline of receipt of absentee ballots election day, we're allowing them to be mailed as late as election day. That means it takes a day or two or three to get those in the mail and then be processed. But again, we're going to be way ahead of the rest of the country. I do have some concern that some states are going to take weeks to count their ballots, in particular swing states in the presidential race. And so I think we'll be biting our nails potentially for a week or two, maybe longer. But at least in Kentucky, we're going to be ahead of the curve.
Let's switch gears and talk about ballot security. And this is a question for both of you. We'll stick first with Secretary Adams. It's something that's top of mind. We're hearing a lot about it. What can you tell voters just to kind of ease their mind that's being done to ensure ballot security here in Kentucky?
Well, most of the concerns I hear about that come from my side of the aisle, the Republican side. I want to tell folks the stuff that we're doing has been endorsed by Donald Trump. Donald Trump has condemned the vote by mail system they use on the West Coast, where they register you to vote without your prior knowledge and they mail you a ballot you didn't ask for. That's not what we're doing in Kentucky. It's not what most states do. 44 states have absentee balloting, not vote by mail. That's what we've adopted this year. Now, historically, we're 2% absentee. In the primary, we were 75%. We might be 40% in November. But this is a system that requires the voter to proactively register, requires the voter to proactively ask for the ballot, requires the voter to proactively provide proof of identity to get that ballot. And then that ballot has a barcode. The ballot doesn't, the envelope does. And that allows us, it allows law enforcement, it allows the voter, it allows everybody to track that ballot through the system and look for any abnormalities or irregularities. The voter can track a ballot the way he or she tracks a UPS package. It's total transparency. And then the voter has to sign the envelope in a couple of places and then return that back. And then we check every single signature on every single ballot, no matter how many there are. So we've got controls. This is not a new process. Absentee being a significant part of the vote is a little new to us, but we've had absentee balloting as a guaranteed right in our state constitution since 1945. Our clerks have been doing absentee voting their entire careers. It's been in our constitution for 75 years. I voted absentee the first time in my first election in '94. It's an airtight system. It follows best practices that are followed around the country for ensuring that the vote is cast by the voter and not someone else.
Clerk Blevins, is there anything that you wanted to add on that?
No, I think that's a pretty thorough answer. I would just say that we saw 0 cases of fraud in Fayette earlier this year. Every ballot was checked. We had, just as a fun anecdote, about 50 or so that the signatures did not match, and we had to reach out to those voters to do what's called a signature cure. My favorite outtake from that was a handful of younger folks who said, "Oh yeah, I've been experimenting with what I want my signature to look like, so I change it once in a while." And I was, what are you doing? But once we got through them, we were able to verify that all 50 of those people were indeed the folks that submitted the ballot.
Next question, and I'll stick with Clerk Blevins. You know, there lately has been some thought about casting the absentee ballot and then going and showing up on election day, which I know Secretary Adams said don't do that. But what happens if you check your absentee ballot, you're tracking it, it hasn't arrived and it's election day? Should you just hold tight? Should you show up and let the poll worker know what's going on and cast a provisional ballot? What's your advice there?
Okay, well, first of all, you physically cannot make it work to vote twice. We've got protections in place to prevent that. You may have seen a recent article about Georgia having over 1,000 people pull that stunt. And I feel like, yes, it's criminal to do that, no question. However, that means that Georgia had a failure in their system if that was allowed to happen. So that can't happen here. We have ways to stop it. So after you request your ballot, we're just now beginning to go through the backlog of 45,000+ ballots. So it's going to take us a few days at least, if not a week, just to get all these, the big backlog cleared out. So folks that have already requested their ballot should start to see them, I don't know, mid next week, certainly by the end of September. If you've requested your ballot before today and you don't see it by, say, October the 1st, you need to be contacting my office so that we can do something about it. In fact, once we get through the big push here, I would say if you don't get your ballot within 2 weeks of request, then something's wrong. You need to reach out to the office. Now, fast forwarding to the future where it's now past October 9th, you asked for your ballot a month ago, still haven't gotten it. You try to reach out to the office for whatever reason you've been unable to connect or something, then what you can do, we don't want this to happen very often, but if you have to, you can submit a paper thing that says, I want to cancel my absentee ballot. And then once that's processed, you can go vote at the polls. So that's the sort of safety valve for those voters that might have a really big problem. Everybody else, it's no big deal. Call us and we'll take care of it.
Great. We did have a question from the audience, and I'll stick with Clerk Blevins. And Secretary Adams, you might want to weigh in this too. Is there a better way in terms of sending in your absentee ballot? Is mail the best way, or do you think just to make 100% certain dropping it off is the way to go? We had a question on whether there's a preference in terms of either of the two.
Well, I think right now, either way is fine. As we approach election day, my personal thought is you're probably safer to do it at a drop box and not take the chance that your ballot might get lost or whatever. So as we ramp up toward election day, I would lean more towards the drop box, but right now either one will work fine.
Great.
Yeah, I want to chime in. I agree completely. All things being equal, I like the drop boxes better because we don't have to pay the postage for that return ballot. The postage is very expensive. We're going to spend millions of dollars on postage in this election. It's the vast majority of our extraneous costs beyond our regular election costs. It's not cheap. We didn't want any poll tax issues, and so we wanted to be compassionate and generous and fund that. but we're running out of federal dollars to cover it. The state's going to be on the hook for it. So all things being equal, just give it back to us instead of mailing it. But I do want to reassure people that whether you mail it back or you hand deliver it back, it's the same protocols to keep your ballot both secret and secure.
And sticking with Secretary Adams, we had a question from the audience also about when people in other counties could expect to start seeing their ballots. Clerk Blevins mentioned, about a 2-week turnaround. Would that be similar in other counties, or might it take a little bit longer in a smaller county?
There's 120 different answers to that question. I would just say that we expect that all of the clerks will have their ballots printed in the next couple of weeks and begin processing to get those out. By law, they couldn't start doing that until the 4th of September passed. That was the deadline to file for president. We actually had Kanye West file that day. That afternoon, showed up at our office with 19,000 signatures. And so we can't certify the ballot until that deadline passes and everyone gets their shot to be on the ballot. And then at that point, it's permissible for the counties to go ahead and order their ballots. And that takes time to get those ordered and printed and sent back. And so there shouldn't be a big deviation in different counties. Every county should be getting their ballots in September, and then voters should be receiving those by late September, early October, most likely, if they've already requested them. Obviously, we're waiting until the 9th to close the portal, so people still got some time. But we do encourage voters to go ahead and apply. Go ahead and get that request in. The sooner you do it, the sooner we can get you a ballot.
Right.
Carla, I can give a little bit of insight into that. The Secretary is correct. On September the 4th, when the last day to file passed, we still had to wait a day or two for his office to certify the ballot. And then once that was done, the vendors needed to set the machines or actually complete the ballots for everybody across the state, all at the same time, and then print the ballots. So there's a practical gap between September the 4th and when all of this can just begin in earnest. Most counties will have had at least enough ballots to get started by now. The next thing that's a little bit of a trick is that the state board is just now releasing the data to the vendor that's going to print our labels that will be on the outer envelope to come out to the voter and on the return envelope. Those labels are a critical part of the process, and most counties don't have them yet. I'm lucky. I think I may be the only county that prints our own labels. Because of that, when they released the data late Monday night and Tuesday, I was able to go ahead and start printing labels, and we can start shipping our ballots. So practically speaking, the rest of the state probably won't start until Thursday. Let's see, what is today? Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday probably will be the first day they start shipping ballots.
Okay. I'm going to stick with you. Just really practical questions that have come up. When you're matching signatures, are you matching them to the driver's license signature? And then secondly, are there going to be appointments for early voting like there were last time, or is it just show up and vote? Okay,
so let's do the appointments first. There will be no appointments this time. It's all just show up and vote. The expanded period of time with early voting is going to really help with that. So I think people can just go when it's convenient for them, including, don't forget, we have Saturday hours. In Fayette County, we'll vote from 9 to 1 p.m. on Saturdays as well. The weekdays, just to put it out there, will be 8:30 to 4 p.m. Except for Election Day, of course, which is 6 to 6. Let's see, how do we check signatures? Well, primarily, we will probably be using the driver's license signature if it's available. However, what you find in practice is that you typically need more than one signature to compare against to really be sure. So we also use your voter registration card. We use an application signature from the past. Anything that we have on file is fair game, and we find that that's necessary sometimes.
Great. Last question before we have wrap-up comments. Secretary Adams, what's your legislative agenda for 2021? Any changes that you want to see permanently made? Maybe lessons learned from this that carry forward, or just other ways to improve the election process?
Well, I haven't had an opportunity to assess that yet. I'm going to wait till this election is over before I approach the legislature and talk with them about what we should make permanent, if anything. I have said a couple of things I think have shown that they should be made permanent. One is the portal. I think the portal has been a great reform. Whatever classes of folks we do or don't let vote absentee in the future, that process should be as simple and easy as possible and should allow for transparency of every voter's ballot. So I think we should make the portal permanent. I also think we should make the cure process permanent. That's not something that's in our laws. That's something that my office invented in response to the fact that we're going to have so many more votes cast absentee. My guess is that we'll never go back to 2% absentee as we've had for certainly my whole career in politics. Historically, in our elections, 90% vote in one 12-hour span on one day and 2% vote absentee. Now that people know absentee is out there, they realize that many more of them qualify for it under our current laws that existed prior to the pandemic. And so I think we'll always have, going forward for generations maybe, more people voting absentee, even if our laws don't change. And if that's right, then I think we need to make that as clean and simple as possible and transparent with the portal, and also have a cure process for those ballots that are through no intent of the voter or just insufficient as a matter of law, and not counted unless we're able to reach the voter and get the problem fixed.
Clerk Blevins, any closing comments that you want to make?
Well, first, tomorrow at 1 o'clock, the mayor and I will have our big announcement press release about how a few more details. I mean, you all probably can guess some of the locations pretty easily, but anyway, we'll make it official tomorrow. My county board votes on it in the morning. We submit that same plan for approval to the state board, as well as the secretary and the governor. Hopefully will be approved, and then we'll get to work. I thought real quick I'd answer these questions if it's okay with you. There's a couple of quick, easy ones. Why not allow absentee ballots to begin being processed earlier than election day? We are doing that. That may not have been made clear. By the emergency regulation, we can begin ballot processing on the 28th of September. And in my county, we probably will start on the 29th, maybe. We'll see. I'm not sure that we'll have enough ballots to make it worth it. But we'll begin, you can begin on the 28th, which is one of the huge advantages this time, is we have a much longer period of time to process the ballots. So hopefully people will return them earlier. Let's see, why not aim for 100% absentee? That's a political question. We'll save that for another time. We will do more education of the public about how to fill out the ballots. There's several entities that are trying to make videos for it. The Secretary, you might want to speak about the changes to the rules regarding the return of the ballots. I understand that you all changed them even further yesterday. I wasn't able to attend your board meeting.
Oh, sure. Just real fast. We had some discrepancies, not in a nefarious way, but we had different county boards of elections in the primary with different ways that they handled particular errors voters committed in filling out their absentee ballots. We didn't have universal standards for them all to follow. The boards of elections kind of follow their own standards. Some of them contacted people who made a mistake that wasn't a signature mismatch. It was some other mistake, and other counties didn't contact those people. So to ensure that we treat everybody the same across the state, we have universal directives that were issued by the State Board of Elections, and the governor and I have approved those too. I'll go into all the technicalities, but basically they provide a cure process. It's expansive to every sort of error that a voter might commit on an absentee ballot, not just a signature that doesn't match, but a failure to sign where appropriate, failure to seal the envelope, and mistakes that unfortunately people make. So we've got universal directives for a universal cure process, and also some guidance on how to interpret Kentucky law on whether to count a particular ballot or not. But again, even voters who make a mistake with their ballot not to be counted, those will be contacted so they can remedy the error that they made on their ballot.
Any other closing comments? And if you could also include a plug for what the web address is for the portal, so people can get signed up if they haven't yet.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So govoteky.com. You can register to vote until October 5th at 4 p.m. You can request your absentee ballot there until 11:59 p.m. on October 9th. You can volunteer to be a poll worker. We'll send your application off to your county clerk of your home county. You can track your ballot once you've requested it. You can change your voter information and make sure it's accurate. You can check it. You can update it if you need to. Maybe your address has changed or your name has changed. So it's a pretty handy dandy Swiss Army knife for our election. So next deadline to remember is October 13th. That is the first day we'll have early voting across the state. And then, of course, November 3rd at 6 p.m., this election finally ends. That's your deadline to get that ballot back to us. You can hand deliver your absentee ballot back until 6 p.m. election day. You can vote in person until 6 p.m. election day, or you can mail your ballot back as late as the 3rd of November. If it's postmarked and we get it by the 6th, we're able to count it. But by all means, don't take your time. Look, if you know who you're going to vote for, there's no reason to delay. The sooner you get this done, the sooner we can catch your ballot and move on and have some finality. If you don't know who you're for yet, take your time, make an informed decision. But most voters tend to be already pretty opinionated, so go ahead and vote. Vote early or vote absentee and go ahead and get it back to us.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Secretary Adams, Clerk Blevins, for taking the time. I know you're all extremely busy. We really appreciate everything that you're doing. We will be making this webinar available, so be on the lookout for a public policy email later this week, and stay tuned for other policy events. Thanks to everyone and have a good day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.